Let's talk some chess. This game was played in 1929 in Warsaw, Poland. It has earned the name the Polish Immortal in chess history, and I think it's a title very deserving of this game. As we will see, the player with the white pieces is named Glucksberg. Unfortunately, couldn't find any information on Glucksberg. The player with the black pieces is named Miguel Najdorf, who that name should be familiar. You've probably seen the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense, so a famous name in chess history, and now we have a famous game to line up with the famous name. We have d4 here, opening. F5, so we won't have the Najdorf variation in this game. We just have Najdorf playing in this game. C4 by white, and now knight to F6. So very sort of standard stuff here. Knight to C3, E6 pushing in the center, and knight to F3. So, maybe not the most common opening we've seen, but, there are pawns trying to control the center. There are 3 knights out and on the board, so very reasonable stuff so far. D5 by Najdorf here, pushing in the center, attacking this weak C4 pawn, which is undefended. So white has to make a decision, and here white just ignores it and plays, white does not ignore it. White plays E3, which creates a discovered defense from the bishop on F1. So now you can't just take the pawn, or the bishop will develop with tempo. So instead, C6 is played, adding to this pawn on D5, and now bishop to D3, developing a piece, preparing to castle kingside. We have bishop to D6, likewise developing and preparing to castle kingside, and now that both sides are prepared to castle kingside, both sides indeed castle kingside. We have knight to E2, a nice little rerouting move, getting the knight over to the king side, hopefully, where it can be more useful attacking this king. And now knight b to d7 by Najdorf, developing a piece and connecting the two knights, although it does lock in this light squared bishop for the moment. We have knight to g5 here, and this is kind of the move that starts the avalanche, I guess we should say. The pebble that starts the avalanche. This knight is defending h2, and you might think, why do you need to defend h2? It's attacked by the bishop, but it's defended by the king, and surely that's what Glucksberg thought here when knight g5 was played. Why does this have to be defended on h2? That's totally fine. But immediately Najdorf jumps into a bishop takes on h2 with check. And the proper move here is actually just playing b3 and keeping the knight on f3, defending the h2 square. And then after after you get this knight to e4 move, and this is a very powerful knight, but it's okay. You can deal with this. You play bishop to b2, ignoring it for now, and sort of just continue on normally. But it's probably this knight to e4 move that induced Glucksberg to play knight to g5, protecting the e4 square, and saying, okay, I'm going to protect e4, and I'm going to ignore this h2 square. But again, this doesn't work. This leads to a wonderful sacrifice on h2. Bishop takes on h2 with check. And interestingly enough, here Glucksberg doesn't take the bishop. King to h1 is played. You can take the bishop. It's better to do so. Bishop takes on h2, but then you do get the very scary knight to g4 with check. And now after the king retreats, then queen takes knight on g5. So you're no longer up material. You're missing an h-pawn, and you have a queen and a knight attacking the king here. Here you can play knight to f4, e5 tries to kick the knight away, and then the knight comes to h3, clogging up the h-file and attacking the queen on g5. The king retreats, and then the queen retreats, and then you kind of continue as normal. This is definitely a better position for black, but Glucksberg clearly didn't want to go into this, so king to h1 is played, leaving this bishop on the board, which probably not the best idea, as we will see. And now, anyways, you get the same move, knight to g4, adding protection to this bishop on h2. And now there's no choice. You cannot capture the bishop on h2, and we should note that this is open to discovered attack from the queen to the knight on g5. So what do? Well, here Glucksberg plays f4, getting a defender to this knight, so trying to solidify the position, opening up the f2 square. Maybe that can be useful if the queen or rook wants to come by this way and defend. But first we get queen to e8 by Najdorf, threatening to bring the queen onto the h-file, where it will be very, very deadly for Glucksberg's king. So g3 is played. It's tough. It's tough to find a good move here. This solidifies the pawn on f4, creates an escape square for the king on g2. Tough to find a good move here, but at least cutting away the h4 square, I guess you could say, but the queen can happily come to h5, which it does. And now king to g2, so this is the idea. Get the king off of the h-file. Maybe there's some way that you can escape to the queen side, and all will be well. But now here you get the first of a series of really sort of wonderful moves that just lead to a brilliant attack. And the first one is bishop to g2. So the idea here is you want to vacate the h2 square because the queen would love to come to h2 and check the king. The queen is obviously protected by the knight, and in this case the bishop. You can't accept this as a sacrifice. Well, I guess, well, we'll see. But you can't take it with the king because then this is just checkmate after the queen comes to h2. I don't think taking it with the rook works either for the same exact reason. In any case, we'll see some really interesting lines, so we're not going to go into that one. Here, instead you get knight takes on g1, which looks better than rook takes on g1, honestly, because now the knight is in the game. It's protecting these squares. The queen has opened up an alley. Now it's sort of pinning this knight to the black queen on h5. So it looks like a very reasonable kind of move to make, but it does allow queen to h2 with check. So the knight is now protecting the queen, and again, black has sacrificed a bishop, but the bishop that originally took on h2 is now off the board, but you do have this wonderful attack, the knight protecting the queen here. The king has one square to go to, and that is f3. But in this position, it's kind of hard to figure out how to continue this attack. You do have the knight, you do have the queen, but you clearly cannot play queen to f2 check. This would be checkmate if there was no rook on f1, but there is a rook on f1, so you can't do that. And maybe that's why the rook, actually that might have been why. Yeah, look at that. That's why the rook can't take on g1, because then queen to h2 and then queen to f2 is checkmate. So that's why you cannot take with the rook. Glad we learned that on the fly. But anyways, the rook is on f1, so you can't bring the queen to f2. You're down a piece. The king looks kind of safe here, so it's kind of tricky to figure out how to continue. So see if you can find the way to continue this attack and send this game into the history books while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, so there's a lot of pieces you can move here that look very threatening, but often the most threatening piece is just a simple pawn move, and in this case, the move is e5. And this is just an awesome move in this position. I would never have thought to play e5. So the idea here is, like, what's being threatened? Whenever a move like this is played, you have to think of what's the threat. Let's say if this move is just ignored and you play a3, then you get... Wait, that's not the line I did. Let's see, you play... Wait. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. e5. I thought I did this line. Maybe I didn't. Oh, I did. Okay, there we go. Let's say you ignore this and play what looks like a very reasonable move, queen to c2, right? You are threatening to pick up the queen on h2. You now have two pieces attacking this f5 pawn. Looks very good, but then you get e4, because obviously the pawn is on e5, and you get e4 check. And the king has 0 squares to move to. The second rank is taken by the queen. These squares are taken by the pawn, and this is not going to work. So you have to take the pawn with the knight on e4, but then you get knight to d5 with check, pawn takes, and now pawn takes on e4 with check, bishop takes, and now the really beautiful finish. I'm going through this fast, but that's because there are many lines like this. Knight to e5, and this is actually checkmate because the knight is cutting off g4, checking the king, and the queen is taking the second rank away. So basically, you can't allow this pawn to get to e4 because checkmate will be delivered. So that's why this e5 move is so spectacular and so threatening, and that's why, in this case, Glucksberg has to deal with it and has to take on d5. But the beauty of this move, this e5 move, is that it forced one of these pawns to take, but now there's only one pawn defending e5, which is going to be important. Before there were two pawns defending e5, so it didn't really make sense to sack on e5, but now there's only one pawn defending it, the f4 pawn, so it's going to be easier to attack. And as if to prove that statement, we have knight takes on e5 with check, and yes, this is a sack, but there's only one pawn defending. So now when this pawn takes, which, it kind of has to, oh my god, sorry about that. My bad. When this pawn takes, which it has to, the king has no squares to move to, now there are no more pawns defending e5, and e5 can be, the knight can move here with abandon. So that's exactly what happens. Knight takes on e5 with check. And again, this is only made possible by the beautiful pawn move to e5, which forced the pawn from d4 to take, thus eliminating another defender of the e5 square. So you're checking the king. The king only has one square, but the king has to move because this knight cannot be captured. So king to f4 is played, but then the knight continues to dance. Knight to f6 with check, and again the king is not. The king's in a lot of trouble. It has to go back to f3, but now you get the just. Yeah, this is just another beautiful. Well, yeah, we could stop at every move because they're all so good. But here we get f4, which is just another wonderful way to continue this attack. This opens up a diagonal from the light squared bishop, which is the whole idea behind it. And yeah, it is, the pawn is threatened by these two pawns, but you now have a light squared bishop that is going to join in the attack. So e takes on f4, but now another sacrifice, another beautiful sacrifice of a minor piece, bishop to g4 with check, and again you pretty much have to accept the sacrifice because the bishop is skewering the king to the queen. So you can't move to e4, or sorry, e3 with the king, because then bishop takes, and this is very sad. This is game over. So you have to accept the sacrifice, but in doing so, you're walking the king up the board. You take on g4, and now the king is on the 4th rank, and you have the knight, and you have the queen, and yeah, this isn't going to go so well. You do have this escape valve, right? The king can move to f3 and sort of try to escape and get back home, but Najdorf cuts that off right away with knight to e5 check. And just, again, this knight has just been a monster, going back and forth, forcing the king into sort of these positions. And the beauty of this knight to e5 check, it obviously checks the king, but it prevents the king from running away to f3, and it just forces the king into the meat grinder where checkmate is going to be unavoidable. So the king cannot move here, right? This is a knight sacrifice. The king cannot move. All these squares are taken away by either the knight or the queen or the rook. Don't forget about this rook on f8. So you have to accept this sacrifice. And again, just a beautiful move. Kudos to this knight, but you do have to accept the sacrifice. So f takes on e5. But again, the whole idea, we're seeing these moves that build towards sort of future ideas. Now the f-file is open, now the rook is controlling the f-file, and now there is no escape for the king, and now it is checkmate in one move. So take a moment and see if you can finish off the Polish Immortal while I give you a couple seconds. Okay, so I think there's only one mate in this position, but it's a beautiful one. It is, again, I think the theme of this game has been amazing pawn moves, and it's finished off with the best pawn move of all, h5, and this is checkmate. The rook is cutting off the f-file, the queen is cutting off the h-file, the pawn is checking the king, and the queen is protecting the pawn. So just a beautiful, beautiful finishing position. You can see that Najdorf has given away all of his minor pieces, both bishops and both knights, and a ton of pawns as well, but it's all in service of a worthy cause, which is checkmating the enemy king. So an awesome game, very worthy of an immortal label. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Drop a like, drop subscribe. Let me know of other games you'd like to see me review, and we'll see you next time.